My name is Rebecca Hayes, and I'm 32 years old. The day my brother Marcus drove past my estate and called our father screaming was the day I realized that success tastes sweeter when it's built from nothing, especially when the people who wrote you off are forced to watch. But let me take you back to the moment that shattered me completely. 2 years before Marcus's panicked phone call, I stood in my parents' kitchen on a cold November evening, my hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. I'd come to share exciting news about a small business loan I'd finally been approved for, $20,000 that felt like a mountain of possibility. My mother sat at the table, barely looking up from her phone. My father stood by the window, his back to me, as it always seemed to be. "That's nice, Rebecca," Mom said flatly, her thumb still scrolling. "Marcus just closed on his house today." "Did we tell you?" The words hit me like a slap. I set down my mug carefully, trying to keep my hands from shaking. His house? Dad finally turned around, and there was something in his eyes, not quite guilt, but close. "We helped him with the down payment. It's a beautiful 4-bedroom in Oakmont Hills. You should see it." "Helped him?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "How much?" The silence stretched like taffy. Mom finally looked up. $230,000. Your father and I liquidated some investments. Marcus has been so responsible, Rebecca. He graduated top of his class, he works at the firm, he's getting married next year. And I'm what? The question burst out of me. I'm nothing? Dad's face hardened. You're 29 years old, working 3 part-time jobs, living in that shoebox apartment. When are you going to get your life together? We're not going to enable your poor choices. Poor choices? I felt something crack inside my chest. I put myself through community college while working full-time because you told me you couldn't afford to help. I've been paying off student loans while Marcus lived at home rent-free through grad school. That's enough. Mom's voice was ice. Your brother made smart decisions. He invested in his education, he networked, he planned ahead. You've always been impulsive, Rebecca. Always chasing these little dreams instead of buckling down and doing real work. I looked between them, these two people who were supposed to love me equally, and saw the truth I'd been avoiding my whole life. I wasn't their daughter in the same way Marcus was their son. I was the mistake they were still trying to correct, the disappointment they discussed in whispered conversations when they thought I couldn't hear. You're right, I said quietly, setting down the mug and grabbing my purse. I have been making poor choices. Coming here tonight was definitely one of them. Rebecca, Dad started, but I was already heading for the door. Don't call me unless you have something kind to say. Actually, don't call me at all. I drove home through tears that blurred the streetlights into golden smears. In my tiny apartment, my shoebox, as Dad had called it, I sat on my second-hand couch and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to beg for their love anymore. I wasn't going to keep showing up to family dinners where Marcus's achievements were celebrated with champagne while my small victories earned polite nods. I was done. That night, I blocked their numbers. All of them, Mom, Dad, Marcus, even my Aunt Linda, who always seemed to be their messenger when they wanted to criticize me without the confrontation. The silence that followed was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, hit that like button and subscribe. This story gets wild, and you won't believe what happens next. Trust me. The first few weeks were the hardest. I'd reach for my phone on Sunday mornings, that old habit of the obligatory family call pulling at me like muscle memory. But I'd remember Dad's face when he said I was enabling my own failure, Mom's dismissive tone, and I'd set the phone back down. My business loan came through in December. I used every penny to launch my online vintage clothing boutique, something I'd been planning for 3 years but never had the confidence to pursue. People had always complimented my eye for fashion, my ability to spot quality pieces at thrift stores and estate sales, but I dismissed it as a hobby, not a real career. My parents certainly had. But without their voices in my head telling me I was wasting my time, something shifted. I worked 16-hour days, photographing inventory, building my website, learning about SEO and social media marketing from free YouTube tutorials. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for weeks to save every dollar for inventory. My apartment became a warehouse, racks of clothing lining every wall, shipment boxes stacked in towers that sometimes toppled over at 3 in the morning. 3 months in, I made my first $1,000 profit in a single week. I cried in my bathroom, mascara running down my face, because for the first time in my life, I'd done something significant without my parents' money or approval. 6 months in, I hired my first employee, a college student named Maya who had an incredible eye for trends. The boutique was growing faster than I'd dreamed possible. Vintage was having a moment, and I'd somehow caught the wave at exactly the right time. 8 months in, I signed a lease on a small storefront in the Arts District. The day I hung my sign, Revelry Vintage, where stories are worn, I took a photo and almost sent it to my parents. Almost. But I stopped myself. This victory was mine alone, and sharing it with people who'd spent my whole life telling me I'd fail would only poison it. Marcus tried calling me twice during this time. I didn't answer. I didn't text back. I'd meant what I said that November night. I was done. Whatever relationship we'd had, whatever sibling bond had existed beneath the obvious favoritism, I'd cauterized it. Sometimes the only way to heal is to cut away the infected tissue completely. The business exploded in my second year. A popular lifestyle influencer stumbled into my shop, bought a 1960 Chanel jacket, and posted about it to her 4 million followers. My website crashed from the traffic. I had to hire 3 more employees just to keep up with orders. I moved the business into a larger space and signed deals with 2 fashion blogs for exclusive features. Money started coming in, real money. Not the kind that made me comfortable, but the kind that made me powerful. I paid off my student loans in one lump sum. I traded my beat-up Honda for a sensible but nice SUV. I moved out of my apartment into a condo with actual square footage and windows that let in natural light. And then, exactly 18 months after I'd walked out of my parents' kitchen, I did something crazy. I bought a house. Not just any house, a small estate on the edge of town that had belonged to a fashion designer in the 1920s. It was a foreclosure, needing work, but it had good bones and nearly an acre of land. The realtor thought I was insane to take it on, but I saw potential where others saw decay. I paid cash, leveraging everything I'd built, every dollar I'd saved and earned and fought for. The renovation took 6 months. I worked with architects and contractors, learning as I went, making decisions that terrified and thrilled me. I had the exterior painted a soft sage green with cream trim. I restored the original hardwood floors, replaced the ancient plumbing, modernized the kitchen while keeping its vintage charm. I planted gardens, roses and lavender and herbs that would bloom in the spring. The day I moved in, I stood on the wraparound porch with a glass of wine, looking out at my land, my house, my life that I'd built from nothing but stubbornness and spite and a desperate need to prove I was more than their disappointment. I didn't know Marcus had driven past that day. I didn't know he'd seen the moving trucks, the furniture being carried in, the obvious expense of renovation. I didn't know that seeing my success I'd achieved without their help, without their approval, would send him into a panic. But I was about to find out. Because the next morning, my phone rang. Not my number, he couldn't call me directly since I'd blocked him. But he called my store. Maya answered and, not knowing the family history, gave him my current number when he claimed it was an emergency. The voicemail he left was 4 minutes long and changed everything. What did Marcus say in that voicemail that made Rebecca question everything she thought she knew? The answer involves a lie that had been told for 2 years, a betrayal that cut deeper than the favoritism, and a truth about that $230,000 that would make Rebecca's blood run cold. Chapter is where everything you think you know gets flipped upside down. I almost deleted Marcus's voicemail without listening to it. For 3 days, it sat in my inbox like a ticking bomb, his name on my screen a reminder of everything I'd worked so hard to leave behind. But on the 4th day, during a slow Tuesday afternoon at the boutique, curiosity got the better of me. I locked myself in the back office, poured a strong cup of coffee, and pressed play. What I heard made my hands go numb. "Rebecca, it's Marcus." His voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "I know you don't want to talk to me, and I understand why, but you need to hear this. I drove past your new house yesterday. Jesus Christ, Beck. It's beautiful. It's bigger than mine." There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like traffic noise. He was calling from his car. I called Dad immediately. "I was excited for you, honestly. I thought maybe seeing how well you were doing would make them realize they'd been too hard on you." "But Dad..." Another pause. Dad got quiet. Really quiet. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. He said, she wasn't supposed to be able to do that. I sat up straighter, my coffee forgotten. When I pushed him on it, he tried to backtrack, but Mom was there, and they started arguing. "Beck," they thought, his voice cracked. "They thought if they didn't help you, if they made it clear they didn't believe in you, you'd give up on your silly boutique idea and go back to school for something practical. They thought you'd fail and come crawling back, ready to do things their way." The phone nearly slipped from my shaking hand. That money they gave me? The $230,000? There was more. There was a trust fund Grandma Helen set up for both of us when we were kids. You had one too, Beck. Same amount. But when you turned 25 and could access it, they convinced Grandma's estate lawyer that you were financially irresponsible. They showed him your credit card debt from college, your job history, everything that made you look unstable. They got your portion rolled into the family trust with them as controllers. I couldn't breathe. The walls of my little office seemed to be closing in. They gave me my trust fund and your trust fund, Rebecca. That's what the $230,000 was. Half of it was yours. They stole from you and then called you a failure for not having what they took. The voicemail ended with Marcus saying he tried to confront them, that there'd been a huge fight, and that he needed to talk to me in person. But I barely heard any of it over the roaring in my ears. My grandmother, my sweet, generous Grandma Helen, who died when I was 23, had left me money. Real money. The kind of money that could have changed my life, paid for proper schooling, given me a foundation to build on. And my parents had stolen it, given it to Marcus, and then spent 2 years telling me I was worthless. I threw up in the office trash can. Maya knocked on the door 20 minutes later, concerned about the sounds coming from inside. I told her I needed to close early, that I was sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. I felt sick to my soul. At home, I sat in my beautiful living room, the room I'd designed myself, filled with furniture I'd earned, and tried to process the magnitude of their betrayal. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just emotional neglect. It was theft. It was sabotage. It was a deliberate attempt to break me down until I became what they wanted me to be instead of who I was. I thought about calling a lawyer. I thought about calling them and screaming until my voice gave out. I thought about 100 different ways to make them pay for what they'd done. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I unblocked Marcus's number and texted him, "Coffee. Tomorrow. The place on 5th Street. 9 a.m. He responded immediately, "I'll be there." "Beck, I'm so sorry." Sorry. As if sorry could fix this. As if sorry could give me back the years I'd spent thinking I was broken, unlovable, less than. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, running my hands along walls I'd chosen, floors I'd restored, touching every surface that proved I was more than they'd said I was. But the victory felt hollow now, poisoned by the knowledge that they'd actively worked against me, that my success wasn't just despite their lack of support but despite their active sabotage. I found myself in what I'd been calling the library, a small room lined with built-in shelves that I'd been slowly filling with books. On the top shelf, I'd placed the only photo I'd kept of Grandma Helen. She was laughing in it, her arms around both Marcus and me at some long ago summer barbecue. We couldn't have been more than 8 and 11, still young enough to believe that adults were inherently good, that parents always wanted the best for their children. "You tried to give me a future," I whispered to the photo. "And they stole it." The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, armed with questions and barely contained rage. Marcus showed up exactly on time, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 2 since I'd seen him. There were circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit looked slept in. He slid into the chair across from me, hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't even drunk from. "You look good, Beck. Really good. Don't." My voice was flat. "Don't do the small talk thing. Tell me everything." And he did. For the next hour, Marcus laid out a betrayal so calculated it made my skin crawl. Our parents hadn't just taken my trust fund, they'd monitored my social media, keeping tabs on my boutique success. When it became clear I wasn't failing, that I was actually thriving, they'd started worrying. What if I found out about the money? What if I hired a lawyer? What if Aunt Linda or another relative who knew about the trust funds mentioned it? "That's why they pushed the estrangement," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "When you stopped calling, they were relieved. Mom told me it was for the best that you were taking some space." But it wasn't about space, Beck. It was about covering their tracks. "And you knew?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "This whole time, you knew?" "No." He looked genuinely stricken. "I swear to God, I didn't know. They told me it was just their savings, an early inheritance. I knew they favored me, I'm not blind, and I'm not proud of it, but I didn't know they'd literally stolen from you. Not until I saw your house and called Dad and he said that thing about you not being supposed to succeed. I wanted to believe him. Some small, desperate part of me that remembered sharing a treehouse with this man when we were kids, that remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, wanted to believe he hadn't been part of this. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why blow up your relationship with them for me?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Relationship? Beck, they're toxic. I've been realizing it more and more. When Sarah and I got engaged, the the first thing they asked was how much the wedding was costing and whether we considered a prenup to protect the family assets, meaning the money they gave me, including your stolen inheritance. When I defended Sarah, Mom said I was being manipulated. They've been trying to control every aspect of my life, and I've been letting them because it was easier than fighting. He reached across the table like he might take my hand, then thought better of it. Seeing what you built without them, without their money or approval, made me realize I've never done anything independently. Everything I have, everything I am, is because they paved the way. And they hate that you succeeded anyway. They absolutely hate it. It makes their entire worldview, that you need them to survive, completely wrong. So what now? I asked. You tell me this devastating truth and then what? We have a tearful reunion and go back to being siblings? No, he said quietly. I tell you this truth because you deserve to know it. What you do with it is up to you. But Beck, you should also know that they're terrified. They're terrified you'll sue them, that you'll expose them to the family, that you'll somehow destroy the reputation they've built. Dad's been talking about getting ahead of it, spinning some story about how they were protecting you from yourself. That's when the plan started forming in my mind. Not revenge exactly, but justice. Accountability. A reckoning. I need to see proof, I said. Bank statements, trust documents, something that proves what you're telling me. Marcus nodded and pulled out his phone. I took photos of everything I could find in Dad's study. It's all here. And Beck? I already talked to a lawyer friend of mine, off the record. You have a case. A strong one. He slid his phone across the table, and I spent the next 30 minutes scrolling through evidence of my parents' betrayal. Account transfers. Legal documents with forged signatures. Email chains between my parents and their lawyer discussing how to handle the Rebecca situation. It was all there, meticulously documented, a paper trail of calculated cruelty. There's something else, Marcus said as I handed back his phone. Dad's firm is up for a partnership vote next month. He's been working toward this for 15 years. If a scandal came out about financial misconduct, even in his personal life, it could tank his chances. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before. Guilt. Genuine, soul-deep guilt that he'd benefited from my suffering, even unknowingly. I'm not who you think I am, I said slowly. I'm not the person who's going to go scorched earth just to hurt them. Marcus's shoulders sagged with what looked like relief. But I'm also not the person who's going to let this go, I continued. They need to face what they did. They need to be held accountable. And they need to understand that I'm not their failure, they are. What do you need from me? Marcus asked. That's when I smiled for the first time since arriving at the coffee shop. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been underestimated for too long and was ready to show exactly what she was capable of. I need you to help me plan a family dinner. Rebecca's about to orchestrate a confrontation that will expose every lie, every theft, every moment of manipulation her parents have engaged in. But the truth has a funny way of revealing even more than you expect. Chapter is where the real chaos begins, and you won't believe who else has been keeping secrets. The invitation went out 2 weeks later, written in my mother's favorite font on expensive cardstock that I had custom printed. You are cordially invited to a family celebration at the home of Rebecca Hayes. Please join us for dinner to mark a special announcement. Dress code, formal. RSVP required. I'd had Marcus deliver them in person with explicit instructions, tell them I wanted to reconcile, that I'd had a change of heart, that success had made me realize family was important. He played his part perfectly, reporting back that Mom had actually cried with relief and Dad had asked 3 times if I was really serious about this. They thought I was finally going to apologize. They thought I'd come crawling back, ready to admit they'd been right all along. The irony was delicious. I spent those 2 weeks preparing. I hired a lawyer named Patricia Chin who specialized in estate fraud and fiduciary duty breaches. She was a tiny woman with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every scam humans could conceive and had successfully prosecuted most of them. "This is solid," Patricia had said after reviewing Marcus's photos and the additional documentation I'd requested from Grandma Helen's estate attorney, who, it turned out, had been uncomfortable with my parents' requests from the beginning and had kept meticulous records. "Your parents committed financial elder abuse by manipulating your grandmother's estate plans, and they committed theft and fraud against you. The forged signatures alone are criminal." "I don't want them in jail," I'd said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I just want them to admit what they did. I want them to face it." Patricia had given me a long look. Sometimes the threat of legal action is more powerful than the action itself. Let's see how they respond when confronted with evidence. The night of the dinner, I transformed my dining room into something out of a magazine. I hired caterers, set the table with china I'd collected from estate sales, arranged flowers, lit candles. Everything was perfect, elegant, proof of the life I'd built. When my parents arrived at 6:30 sharp, their faces were a study in barely concealed shock. "Rebecca, this is..." Mom's voice trailed off as she took in the crystal chandelier, the restored crown molding, the original artwork on the walls. "This is quite something." "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice warm and gracious in a way that I could tell unnerved them. They'd expected the old Rebecca, uncertain and desperate for approval. This version, confident, successful, utterly in control, was foreign territory. Dad handed me a bottle of wine, expensive but not thoughtful. He'd never known what I liked. "You've done well for yourself," he said, and I could hear the question underneath, "How did you afford this?" "I have," I agreed. "Please, come in. Marcus and Sarah are already here." My brother and his fiancée were in the living room, Marcus's jaw tight with tension, Sarah looking confused about why she'd been included in what was clearly going to be a dramatic family event. I'd insisted Marcus bring her. She deserved to see exactly what kind of family she was marrying into. Aunt Linda arrived next, my mother's sister who I'd specifically invited because she'd been there when Grandma Helen's will was read. She had no idea what was coming, but her presence was crucial. Then came Uncle Tom, Dad's brother, who'd always been kind to me in a distant, ineffectual way. And finally, my parents' closest friends, the Hendersons, who Dad was always trying to impress. "Why are the Hendersons here?" Mom whispered as I took her coat. "You said this was a family dinner." "It is," I said simply. "They're like family to you, aren't they? Besides, I wanted witnesses." That word, witnesses, made her face go pale, but there was no graceful way to back out now. Dinner was catered perfectly: filet mignon, roasted vegetables, a salad with pears and candied pecans. I'd hired a sommelier to pair wines with each course. Everything was designed to show them exactly how successful I'd become, how little I needed them. The conversation during the meal was stilted, everyone sensing the undercurrent of tension but not understanding its source. Dad kept asking about my business, his tone probing, looking for some sign that I was in over my head or secretly struggling. I answered each question with calm confidence, watching his frustration grow. So what's this announcement? Uncle Tom finally asked as dessert was being served, a decadent chocolate torte that cost more per slice than my parents had spent on my last 5 birthdays combined. I set down my fork carefully, took a sip of wine, and smiled. I've been doing some reflecting lately. About family, about what we owe each other, about truth. Mom's hand was shaking slightly as she reached for her water glass. She knew. Somehow, she knew this wasn't going to be the reconciliation she'd hoped for. 2 years ago, I walked away from my family because I felt unsupported and undervalued. I was told I was a failure, that my dreams were silly, that I needed to grow up and be more like Marcus. I looked directly at my father as I spoke. I was hurt. Devastated, actually. But I was also determined to prove you wrong. Rebecca, Dad started, we've always wanted the best for. Let me finish, I interrupted, my voice still pleasant but firm. I built my business from scratch. I took a $20,000 loan and turned it into a 6-figure income in less than 2 years. I bought this house with cash. I did it all without your help, without your approval, and certainly without your money. We can see that, Mom said quickly, nervously. And we're so proud of you, sweetheart. That's what tonight is about, isn't it? Coming back together as a family? In a way, I agreed. But first, we need to talk about Grandma Helen's trust fund. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Aunt Linda's fork clattered against her plate. Uncle Tom leaned forward, suddenly interested. The Hendersons exchanged confused glances. What about it? Dad's voice had gone hard, defensive. I pulled out a folder I'd placed under my chair before dinner. Patricia had helped me organize everything into a presentation that would be clear even to people with no legal background. Grandma set up trust funds for both Marcus and me. Equal amounts, $230,000 each. Marcus received his when he bought his house. I'm curious about what happened to mine. This isn't the time or place, Mom started, but Aunt Linda cut her off. Wait, both of them? Helen set up trusts for both kids? She looked between my parents and me, understanding dawning on her face. But you told me Rebecca's money was being held because she wasn't financially stable. You said it was for her own protection. It was, Dad said firmly. Rebecca had credit card debt, no steady job. I had student loans, I corrected, my voice still calm despite the rage bubbling underneath. Student loans that I was paying off while working multiple jobs because you told me you couldn't afford to help with college. Meanwhile, Marcus lived at home rent-free through graduate school. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. This is the trust agreement Grandma Helen signed. 2 trusts, equal amounts, to be distributed when each grandchild turned 25 or graduated college, whichever came later. I handed it to Aunt Linda, who read it with increasing shock. This says Rebecca's trust was supposed to be available to her at 25. That was 7 years ago. We were protecting her from herself, Mom said, but her voice was shaking. She wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. That wasn't your decision to make, Uncle Tom said quietly. If Helen wanted Rebecca to have the money at 25, then that's when she should have gotten it. I pulled out the next document. This is a bank statement from 3 years ago showing a transfer of $230,000 from the family trust to Marcus's account, labeled gift for home purchase. But it wasn't just your money, was it, Mom? Dad? It was mine too. Marcus had been silent until now, but he spoke up, his voice heavy. They told me it was their savings. An early inheritance. I didn't know, Rebecca. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. But they knew. They took my inheritance, gave it to you, and then spent 2 years telling me I was a failure for not being able to afford what they'd stolen from me. Sarah gasped. Mrs. Henderson put her hand over her mouth. Mr. Henderson, who was a lawyer himself, reached for the documents, his expression darkening as he read. There's more, I continued, pulling out the email exchanges. These are communications between my parents and their attorney, discussing how to handle the Rebecca situation. How to keep me from finding out about the trust. How to justify taking my money. I read aloud from one particularly damning email from my mother. If Rebecca succeeds with this boutique nonsense, she'll have enough confidence to start asking questions. Better to maintain the estrangement until the statute of limitations runs out. You were running out the clock, I said, looking at my mother. You were hoping that if enough time passed, I wouldn't be able to legally challenge what you'd done. Mom was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught, someone who was angry at being exposed rather than sorry for what they'd done. We gave you everything growing up. Clothes, food, a roof over your head. We didn't owe you anything beyond that. You owed me honesty, I shot back. You owed me the inheritance my grandmother wanted me to have. You owed me the chance to succeed or fail on my own terms, not with you actively sabotaging me. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. You've clearly done fine without the money, better than fine, if this house is any indication. So what's the problem? You want us to apologize for trying to protect you? Protect me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You stole from me. You committed fraud. You forged legal documents. I pulled out the final piece of evidence. This is my grandmother's signature on the amendment that supposedly gave you control over my trust. And this is a signature analysis from a forensic document examiner confirming that it's a forgery. Mr. Henderson actually gasped. As a lawyer, he understood the implications immediately. That's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. The room erupted. Aunt Linda was yelling at my mother. Uncle Tom was demanding explanations. Sarah looked horrified. The Hendersons were whispering urgently to each other. And my parents just stood there, their perfect image crumbling, their carefully constructed justifications falling apart under the weight of evidence. I hired a lawyer, I said loudly enough to cut through the chaos. I've documented everything. And I'm ready to file both criminal charges and a civil suit unless certain conditions are met. You're blackmailing us? Dad's face was purple with rage. I'm giving you a choice, I corrected. Option 1, I go to the police tomorrow. You face criminal charges for fraud and forgery. The story becomes public. Your partnership vote? Dead in the water. Your reputation? Destroyed. Option 2, you pay me back the $230,000 you stole, plus 7 years of compound interest, plus damages for the emotional harm you caused. You also publicly admit to the family what you did. And you set up college funds for any future grandchildren, equal amounts, regardless of which one of us is the parent. That's extortion, Dad sputtered. That's justice, I replied. And it's generous, considering I could take you for much more in court. I'm giving you the option to make this right privately because, despite everything, some small part of me still remembers that you're my parents. Mom had sunk back into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Dad was staring at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the daughter they'd known, the uncertain, approval-seeking girl, had died in that kitchen 2 years ago, and this version of me was someone entirely new. You have 48 hours to decide, I continued. After that, my lawyer files the paperwork. And just so we're clear, I don't need your money anymore. This isn't about the money. This is about accountability. This is about you facing what you did and admitting that you were wrong. The dinner ended in chaos. Aunt Linda left with Uncle Tom, both of them throwing disgusted looks at my parents. The Hendersons slipped out quietly, their disapproval palpable. Sarah hugged me before she left, whispering, "I had no idea." "I'm so sorry." Marcus lingered, torn between his parents and his sister, before finally following Sarah out. And then it was just the three of us, me, Mom, and Dad, standing in my beautiful dining room surrounded by the ruins of their lies. "You've become cruel," Mom said finally, her voice small and broken. "I've become honest," I corrected. "There's a difference." They left without another word, and I stood alone in my house, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal and my triumph, waiting to see if they would choose redemption or destruction. The 48-hour deadline is ticking. Will Rebecca's parents admit their wrongdoing and pay her back, or will pride and reputation drive them to let everything burn? And what happens when Marcus reveals one final secret that changes Rebecca's understanding of everything? Chapter brings the resolution you won't see coming.